And here we are, battle of the caches. So what is caching? What are we going to learn today, or what am I going to learn from you lot? Question is, what is caching? What are the benefits of caching? What are the cons of caching? I'm going to go through the top 10 plugins as considered from the total downloads from WordPress.org, which are cache-related plugins, and we'll see how many are listed there you've never heard of. And I'm going to have a quick look at how they compare functionally. What do they do that one thing does that another one doesn't? Fine, they all do the same actually. And then how do they compare for real in some tests that I performed to compare the performance of sites with and without caching. We could have a little look at what's the WordPress administration interfaces, because some people think I like it to be simple, and other people like to have very complex things that they can fiddle with the nuts and bolts rather than the whole car. And then I'm going to go through try to go through 5 different plugins that I've used in the performance of caching, which are SiteGround Optimizer, WP Super Cache, W3 Total Cache, Lightspeed Cache, and WP Fastest Cache. I didn't have time to do any more. And then I'll briefly list a couple of the paid plugins, such as WP Rocket, and I suppose Hummingbird Pro is a paid version. Then we could attempt to make some conclusions, where we can read some more, and then move on to a good old chinwag about why you think something better than wise, and how to deal with Terry's problem of, I've got a WooCommerce site, what gets cached, what doesn't get cached, and how do I control it? Right, so we've basically answered the questions again when we had the introduction, but for people who weren't there at the introduction because the video wasn't being recorded, the answers people gave were 4 people used SiteGround Optimizer, 3 WP Rocket, and 1 each of Hummingbird Pro, JCH Optimize, never heard of it, Static, Redis, WP Fastest Cache, and NitroPack, again, never heard of. 3 people didn't reply. No, said, no, I'm not using any caching, and 5 didn't reply, didn't have a chance to reply. Who was it who said, I'm interested in choosing a cache plugin? Not sure if he's here, but Steve said, how can we evaluate performance of the different cache options? Is that right? And there's Terry's question down there, if you can think about it. What does it say? I include a dynamic basket status area on the nav bar. This might not get through a cache properly. Let's think about that. So here's a sort of picture of what caching is all about and where it happens. So it comes cast and hold on. And we start from the left-hand side. The user is on his device, which might be a mobile or a desktop, and he connects to the internet and he wants to go and get some web content from a website somewhere. And if it happens to be a WordPress website, then the application gets involved, goes and accesses the database, returns that to the application, which then formats the page and the HTML, says here's some JavaScript and some CSS you might need, and some images, passes that back to the internet, gets back to the user, and the user says, well, that took a long time, didn't it? Now I'm going to go and ask for another page. And it goes through the whole process again. And you think, well, how can we improve that? And the answer is you can try to improve it just about everywhere. You can do caching so that things that arrive at your browser don't need to be requested again. You can have stuff cached on things like content delivery networks, which is Cloudflare, that sort of thing. And then when it gets into the website itself, it could be cached in such a way that when the page has been served up and it says, well, that's a good one, I'll keep that. Someone else might want to see that one. It can be saved and instantly served up. And then within the system itself, the application can perform different types of caching. And that's listed as on the right-hand side, runtime cache, object cache, page cache, and so on. So the definition below I've shown there for a cache storing data was cribbed straight out of Wikipedia. And so when you're visiting a website and you asked for some data, you'd either get a hit where it's served up from the cache, or you get a miss where it's not served from the cache, or it might be, it would have been a hit, but for some reason it's decided to bypass that, so you get the stuff served from the system itself. So the reason you do caching is progressive enhancement that improves the performance of the application. Now, that's all technical stuff, isn't it? Much easier to think about an analogy where everything stops for tea. So, I want a cup of tea. How do I get that? Well, I go into the kitchen, I fill up the kettle, and I put that onto the boil. Then I go and get a bag out of the tea box, and maybe I want some sugar or some milk, and I make it, and I put the tea bag into my mug and wait a while and pour some milk in, and that's it, I've got a cup of tea. Isn't it possible to speed the process up a bit if I want a cup of tea? And the answer is, well, if everybody did that and went to go and put the kettle on, it would that would slow it down a bit because you're waiting for the kettle to boil. Why don't you boil a lot more water, perhaps? Or maybe you can make a whole pot of tea, and then when you go and ask for your tea, you can say, can I have some tea, please? And it just gets poured out from there. And all sorts of other different things can happen. And in caching, there's wonderful terms such as preload and cache invalidation and compressing output and combine and minify and so on. And all of these different things, you can possibly try to find out how that can be considered as your analogy for what caching is all about. So the preload thing is filling the kettle and making a whole pot of tea, sort of. But what it really is, preload is when you go to a WordCamp and you'll come out of the session at 10:30 or 11 o'clock, and you'll go to the place where they've got hot drinks and cakes, and lo and behold, there's cups already there for you to fill up, or maybe there's cups even already filled in, so you can just go and pick up the cup you want, and it doesn't take long for you to get it, so you're served nice and quickly. Anyone else want to consider any other things for analogies, please? No? All right, then. We might discuss some of these different things in more detail later on. Well, hopefully we will. So why do you do caching? Well, people say that 57% of your visitors will leave if it takes longer than 3 seconds for your website to load. And that's not just the first byte appearing. They want to see the picture. They want to see the styling done, all the CSS animation, all that has to happen nice and quickly for them to be satisfied that their page has appeared. So the reason we do caching is we try to improve the overall performance of the site. And if you do improve the performance of the site, you can reduce the cost of the database processing and other parts of the back-end load. And the faster you can make things in the back end, the less work you do, the more predictable your performance will be. And that can potentially eliminate any hotspots you have in the database where 2 processes or more fight over what's going on in the database and slows all things down. But of course, whenever you do something like that, you have the problems that you might introduce additional cost for some reason, and more complexity in trying to deliver some bits which are cached and some bits which are not. Someone's got to do some extra work to find out what has got to be cached, what has not. There's potentially an unnecessary overhead of you having a caching solution, but nobody ever gets to see anything that's been cached. And finally, for some other people, you could even have a security issue where information that you cached isn't something that should have been shown to Joe Public. Anyone had an experience of that? Right, so looking at WordPress.org and listing the top 10 plugins to do with caching, we find that there's one called SiteGround Optimizer, which has been downloaded the most, but is only used by 1 million sites. Then there's WP Super Cache, which is second on the list. And there's one called Lightspeed Cache, W3 Total Cache, WP Fastest Cache, and the sixth one on the list, WP Optimize. Then there's other ones below. Olga mentioned Redis, and there's Redis Object Cache plugin to help you with that. Hummingbird, and some other things. If you go and visit top10wpplugins.com, that link there, you can see the top 40 of them. You can see there's quite a lot of cache plugins. As well, there's 60,000 plugins in WordPress.org, so there's no surprise really. So I'm going to cover 5 of them, the first 5, and going to try to have a look to see how they compared functionally. So I've basically installed each of these different caches.
Can I say a word there? There's a big difference between the free caches and the ones you license. Yeah, the ones that are licensed are you paid for. Assuming they get a fraction of the downloads because they're $50 or whatever it may be.
Yes. Were you saying there's a big difference, or were you asking?
I'm saying there's a difference in downloads by probably a couple of orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
Just for myself, I went through a bunch of these, or we went through a bunch of these, and ended up with a couple of paid ones because the performance was, I thought, much better. But the downloads tell a different story for sure. Totally understand that.
Well, you don't see Rocket at all in WordPress.org, so it's difficult to compare it. But if you happen to be a person who's got a site that's been told it's a bit slow and you wanted to go and do something for free, then you would probably go and look at first. But each of the plugins, including the premium ones, have this desire to satisfy quite a lot of people, and therefore they have to provide a certain level of functionality, and they all do it at different levels of capability. And this is what this table attempts to show, whether or not the plugin does actually deliver a particular functionality. Now, on this thing, dynamic, SiteGround Optimizer said, "Oh, we provide this dynamic caching, it's unique." And I'll try to understand what they meant by that. And I think what they mean by it is they have a bit of file-based caching, and they use Nginx to have a cache. And they have some special logic that enables the Nginx cache to be maintained from the WordPress cache. So does WP Super Cache, Total Cache, and Fastest Cache do the same sort of thing? I don't know, but Lightspeed Cache says it does. So that's it. But what is this file-based caching? It's where, when you ask for a page or a bit of content, whatever happens to be an archive, the WordPress gets instructed to create the content, and then before that gets returned to the user, it says, well, there's my new page. That looks good. I might need to serve that up again. I'll save that in an HTML file somewhere. And next time a user comes to request that, and we know that he wants that and nothing else, then we can just deliver that directly without going anywhere near WordPress. And so that should happen across the board. But then I'm lying a bit there. WP Fastest Cache doesn't quite do it that way. There's a thing called mem caching, which is where the requests for data get stored in memory, and SiteGround has an interface in their plugin which works only if you happen to work on SiteGround. And other plugins have multiple ways of implementing memcache. W3 Total Cache offers all sorts of different ways of doing it, and so on and so forth. So some of the functionality that people always ask for is, well, I don't want to be cached if I'm logged in because I want to see my own personal data. Other people say, but I'd like to be cached if I'm logged in because there's certain bits that will be faster if I get that cached. And if you happen to be in a site with forums, for example, then you'd like to be able to see certain bits that are cached, but other bits you don't want to have cached. And therefore, you want to have the capability for having bits which are cached and bits are not cached, and the granularity of being able to both decide what goes in the cache and also to decide what gets cleared from the cache when the cache needs to be emptied for whatever reason. Now, the reason you might want to empty the cache is because it happens to be midnight and you're now another day, and therefore any information you have might now be irrelevant for yesterday and you want to see today's information. Or it might just have otherwise got stale. So there's all sorts of different settings that you can control to say how long something's going to stay in the cache. If you happen to have a site which is going to be serving up lots of stuff to lots of people, and whenever you change something, you want to have it ready to serve this information up to those people straight away, then you do preloading. And that's basically making the pot of tea rather than doing it one at a time. If you have some developers that need to implement their own logic rather than have it done from the admin interface into the site, then you'll need to use hooks and APIs, and each of those plugins provides that. And then there's other functionality that you want to deliver for your what they call core web vitals. You might want to reduce your CSS, JavaScript, and HTML that's been delivered by minimizing, compressing, and combining. So some of the cache plugins provide that. Some of them provide it for free, and others provide them in the premium version of the plugin. I've just shown the first list there. If you go and visit that link, there's a lot more on the list. Things like whether or not it supports WP, CLI, etc. But basically, they all look like they all do the same thing somehow or another. So it's not a very good way of comparing them, perhaps, unless there's a particular functionality you need to want to look in more detail. So I decided how we're going to see whether or not they've actually improved my core web vitals. So here we have 5 figures shown in the different numbers that you should be used to. If it goes up to 100, it means it's pretty good. And if it's red, it's not good at all. And if it's in the amber, there's opportunity for improvement. Now, from the left-hand side, the 58, the first figure for SiteGround, was what happens if I happen to use an emulated Moto G4 thing, visiting a page on my website, which was from something we did last year on a website called quicker.com, where I did some performance stuff. And this page displays, what does it display? Displays a couple of images and the video, and that's about it, really. The second figure is a slightly faster mobile device, and the next 3 figures are slightly different versions of laptops or desktops on faster devices. And the before and after figures are, this is the figure I got before I applied any caching, and this is the figure I got after I applied caching. So WP fastest cache seems to be the best for your mobile device for some reason, but the other ones really isn't much difference between them when it comes to your desktop in terms of what we're getting from our light speed, page speed insights results. So yeah, they do help. The caching has somehow helped the core web vitals to get a better result, but did it improve the overall response on the website? So I did some tests in the 4 different sites with SiteGround Optimizer, WP Super Cache, W3 Total Cache, and WP Fastest Cache. I ran some requests where I wanted to find out what the sort of response time was. And on the 8th of January, you can see I got some inconsistent results for the uncached requests. And I thought, that's strange. They're all supposed to behave exactly the same because there's no difference between these websites, apart from the fact I've got a caching plugin installed, but not activated. They still produce the same results. But when I had them cached, you can see that 3 of them, SiteGround Optimizer, WP3 Total Cache, and WP Super Cache, all produced very quick responses for my requests for the home page, and WP Fastest Cache wasn't as quick. And the reason WP Fastest Cache wasn't as quick is because it doesn't serve it directly from the Apache. It does need it to go to load up a little bit of WordPress in order to find the page that you're asking for. But I wanted to improve, I wanted to get a better comparison. I wanted to make sure that all the sites were exactly the same. So on 10th of January, I had another go and turned off some of the different things that I thought were set. So on a couple of the sites, I had some tracing turned on. And I still discovered that W3 Total Cache was taking a lot longer to serve up the uncached page than the other 3 different sites, and didn't make much sense at the time because I had the number of plugins are activated were all exactly the same. But I looked at it and eventually I got an answer. We'll just talk about that later. So you can see when it's cached, I better explain this. The figure is showing the total, it's a percentage of responses within a certain time. So if the better it is, the closer it is to the left-hand side. So W3, that's this green thing here. Can you see my mouse? This green thing here is bad. That thing here is good. So the further to the left, the better the results. Now let's go and have a look at the 4 different results. This time broken down into each different plugin I looked at, and we can see there's no caching turned on, where the caching's turned on, and then in the green line for at least 3 of them, but not WP Total Cache, sorry, green line where caching is turned on, but the cached content wasn't being delivered. And we can see SiteGround Optimizer, W3 Total Cache, WP Super Cache, pretty much the same. They're delivering nice and quickly because it's coming directly from the page cache. And WP Fastest Cache isn't as fast because it's having to go through a little bit of PHP to serve it up. That's my results so far on that. So, how is the administration of these different plugins? SiteGround Optimizer, this little sort of weird paper aeroplane, WP Super Cache with the clock, W3 Total Cache with 3 cubes, Lightspeed Cache, and WP Fastest Cache with the cheetah. Well, I might now, what's the time? Do you actually want to see the admin interfaces for each of these? No?
Yeah, that'd be useful to have a quick look, actually.
Right.
So, yeah, set up. So,
Right, I'll go into this one first if I can now. This is the page that it was looking at. And last year when I was running it, I got performance figures which were up in here because I had some better things. And maybe I wasn't using this theme. Right, go to admin dashboard. So SiteGround Optimizer. Oh, I don't think I've got it activated at the moment, have I? Plugins. SiteGround Optimizer bungs something into the admin menu at the top for purging the cache, but it purges the whole thing, and it has a menu over here. And it likes telling you that you need to do something to fix your website, and it tells you what sort of caching you've got enabled. Now, if you happen to be hosted on SiteGround, then you can choose to turn on and off these particular things. But if you wanted to turn on file-based caching, you have to turn on dynamic caching. And if you want to, and you can turn on memcache caching, but that doesn't work if you haven't got SiteGround hosting because of the interface they have between memcache and the plugin and WordPress. But as you can see here, I've got file-based caching turned on, which in my machine, when I click on that, it automatically turns on dynamic caching. So what does it say? Store your content in the server's memory for a faster access with full page caching solution powered by Nginx. Well, I don't have Nginx on my PC, so I don't know exactly why it turns it on. There you go. This is what I used, file-based caching, and got a nice quick response. And it has an option to say how quickly I'm going to invalidate my cache. And it's currently set so it will be cached for a whole week. I could turn it off, in which case it would never invalidate cache, or I could set it to 12 hours or for 24 hours, which might be a nice, better thing to have. So it's a pretty simple interface here. You just got a few toggles to click on and some questions that you can ask.
So that one there, sorry, interrupting her, the one there when you went into configure the preheat cache, what does that do? When you go back up and configure there under file-based caching?
That would be the preload. So it will go and visit a few pages and save that information for you. We preheat up to 200 Ls based on your sitemap.
Okay.
I don't know which sitemap it's using, whether or not it's, well, I suppose it looks at your sitemap XML. And there's a logged in users cache as well.
Right,
so
okay.
Yeah, you can decide if you've got not many users, then you can have a cache created for each one of those users. So they can have pages that they visit often cached.
I assume Preheat can upload a lot at once in your server, and it can stack for other users. I think sometimes it's happening. So if you have no limits for this option, it's not very convenient to use sometimes.
Yeah. Yes, but I didn't experience that, of course, when I was just testing it on my local machine, because I was the only user using it. And when I was trying to test the caching, I wanted to get it to serve up the cache page all the time, or get it to not serve the cache page all the time in order to measure the response. If I'd have been multiple users coming in from different things and visiting different pages, then of course some people would be getting the cache response and other people would be getting a brand new one. And that's what the bypass figure was, or the if it's not cached, it takes longer than if it is cached. If you have multiple people hitting lots of different content, then it could actually slow the site down. Now, my contact form page is something that I don't necessarily want to have cached, because it's got a nonce in it, which is a use once thing to stop people from spamming. So you can say, I want to add certain URLs into a list of content that you aren't going to cache. And the SiteGround uses a very simple, just edit it. And if you want to add another one, just add another item in there and put that in there. Not sure whether or not I could actually say I wanted to exclude the home page, can't remember, which is what I did when I was doing my performance tests. So that's the SiteGround page caching stuff. And then you can decide on the front end what you want to do with caching or minifying of CSS, JavaScript, and HTML. And so in my tests, I said I wanted to minify the CSS and the JavaScript and the HTML, and therefore that helped a bit with the core web vitals.
So just my experience, when you start to play around with compressing the CSS and JavaScript, depending on your theme and setup, it can really break a site.
Yes.
I mean, quite easily, quite quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got to be very careful with doing that and test it and retest it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the question. That's the concern that everyone has about, well, how do I know it's not broken? And the answer is you have to go and test it fully. So with the WooCommerce question, how do I know it works? You've got to go and test it somehow. And that all takes time. So a lot of people say, well, if I don't do any caching, I know that the page is going to be served up correctly every time because it's coming from the database and coming from the system itself rather than somewhere else.
In when Google ran their AMP accelerated whatever it is thing, one of the features that they promoted was to minimize the number of files. So you're supposed to combine your multiple CSS files into a single one. Do any of these caches do anything like that?
Yes, they do that. And I summarized the details of which one, how they do it, because they have so there's this combined CSS files. So whatever CSS is being delivered on a particular page, it says, right, I'll bung that all together into one thing. If the CSS is written in a certain way, it can cause problems, but you can probably get a change made somewhere to the plugin and or theme that's delivering that CSS that's causing problems. Or you can just tell it to exclude that from the processing. I think minify is simply just reducing the blank space, and the combining is another thing. And then there's the preloading as well. Now WP Rocket has some logic to, what's it called? Build the required CSS only for the above the fold stuff. Is that correct? Alistair's nodding.
Yes, it is. You can do some quite clever things with how you combine it and also where you store the CSS. You can put it up onto some content delivery networks as well, which reduces the speed as well, or the load time. Yeah, there are many options, put it that way.
Good. So, and there's also this business nowadays of WebP images are better than JPEGs and PNGs, and therefore you can decide to use those if you want, or you can perform some level of compression and lazy loading. Now, I don't know how much of WordPress is caught up with the cache plugins, so you won't need to do that anymore in the cache plugins because WordPress provides it for free. But the SiteGround provides some options there. So that was SiteGround Optimizer. And now if we go to WP Super Cache. Oh, some people coming to join us a bit late in the day. Welcome, Andrew. Welcome, Drew.
Good day.
I'm not going to go back and start all over again.
I'm going then.
But this is being cached, so you can view it later. All right, now on to WP Super Cache. I'm looking at the interface for that. So this plugin was written by someone in Automatic quite a long time ago, which is why it's downloaded a few times. It's activated, so I can delete it. So where is it on the menu? Tools. Settings. WP Super Cache. There you go. Now, because it's written by Automatic, it's trying to sell me some Jetpack stuff all the time, which is annoying, isn't it? And in my PC, it has a bit of a problem with the fact that it's either because it's a Windows machine or because it's a subdirectory install or both. But it keeps on telling me that I need to do something with my rewrite rules, which are these things here. Now, I know that my htaccess file, which contains this fancy stuff that says if the user is visiting and he's not logged in and he's asking for a page that I've already cached, and then I can deliver it directly to him without having to go anywhere near WordPress whatsoever. That's the bit that makes it really nice and zippy. It's there. And WP Super Cache has an interface with tabs, so you can look at the different options. And I have actually chosen to use advanced caching in the expert mode, which means changing htaccess. But rather than having a few toggles, it's got lots and lots of checkboxes, but more often than not, I didn't actually need to do anything, just leave them as they all are, as it suggests. It supports a number of different CDNs, but I've never used anything to do with CDNs, and one day someone's going to tell me all about CDNs. So we didn't have that. Here it has the option of capability apparently of displaying what's cached, but does it work? There's nothing cached at the moment. That's because this is the first time I visited this website today, so it all got cleared out. As it by expired files are older than 1800 seconds. We have preload options for what we can do. Then there's a bit of plugins that they can add on to do certain things, and I didn't have any chance to look at that. And then there's the capability of seeing what's going on when it's trying to cache things and they're not working. And here we can see it will produce something on a cached page, so you can tell that. Now, when I was doing my analysis, I had to write some code to go and find out that if the content was being cached, because otherwise I wouldn't trust the results I reported until I'd actually seen something being produced here. So this is a slightly older interface than the SiteGround one, but it's got a lot of stuff there. You don't need to actually go into program anything in order to get the actual functionality you want done. And the same is pretty much true of WP fastest cache and W3 total cache. So here's W3 total cache, and it's got lots and lots of menu items, and probably the first thing it's going to do is to ask me if I want to buy an upgrade. So we have a dashboard which basically says buy something from me. I don't fancy that. So let's go to general settings. And it has tabs again, and you can choose from the different tabs and you can turn on the different things. So I've turned on page caching and I'm using enhanced disk caching, whatever that means. But I could have had all of these different options were they installed and configured in my system. So I could have used opcode cache, which I haven't actually enabled on my machine. It's on my old one, but not on this one here. Or if I'd have had memcache or nginx or redis installed, then I could use that as its page caching. And then I can choose the different levels of minify for CSS and JavaScript. Turn on opcode caching, database caching, which it doesn't recommend, object caching, which is another level of caching, and browser caching, which is where it puts stuff into your htaccess file, causes the browser to say this image is good for another 24 hours, so on and so forth. And then there's CDNs, and here is an enormous list of different CDNs that you can use. So W3 Total Cache has many more options to choose from than I wanted to play with. And eventually I did find a bit that I did want to play with, which was to say, I don't want to cache a particular page. Now,
Do CDNs cost money?
I don't know.
No, you can use Cloudflare for free.
Other CDNs must though, do they?
Yeah, some you pay for. Cloudflare, there's a paid for version and a free version as well, like Perry says. There's different flavors of it.
If you have SiteGround hosting, can't you get your CDN for free as well?
There's two on SiteGround. There's two offerings of a CDN, isn't there? There's a premium one and a free one, basically. So
I think they used to run it straight through Cloudflare, but I don't know if they've stopped that recently.
They did and changed to have their bespoke solution.
I think they take Google CDN. Google announced one last year, I think, and I think that's probably where SiteGround have gone, because a lot of that platform went that way.
I don't know. Anyway, so here's another admin interface, and somewhere along the lines there is a bit where you can say, I don't want you to cache this particular page, but it's not easy to find. But I will. It's in my slides now. It's conscious. It's 8 o'clock, so I need to move on back to the slides. We saw SiteGround Optimizer, Super Cache, a bit of Total Cache. Now Lightspeed Cache, it works with a thing called Lightspeed, and I don't have that, and therefore it didn't actually do anything at all for me. And WP Fastest Cache, I haven't got time to show you that, but it's pretty much the same. In fact, it had quite a nice user interface for saying what you wanted to exclude from the caching in WP Fastest Cache. So just try to summarize the different plugins again. SiteGround Optimizer uses the PHP file called advancedcache.php and objectcache.php, which means it can deliver things nice and quickly. Well, it uses object cache to try to go and find out if the file is there, if it isn't able to serve it up directly from its dynamic cache files. Does that make sense? And when it finds something and it serves it up, that's known as a cache hit. When it finds something and doesn't serve it up, it's known as a miss. When it doesn't find something, it's known as a miss. When it finds something but decides not to serve it up to you, then it's a bypass. Some people have sites on SiteGround where, because they happen to have particular plugins installed, they get a bypass for every single page that's being delivered, which is quite annoying for them, isn't it, Andrew?
No, not at all.
No, isn't it?
It seems quite fast, so at the moment it's not a problem.
Yeah, it's annoying for me.
Yeah.
WP Super Cache, SiteGround Optimizer returns the information about what's being cached in the HTTP headers, which makes it a bit harder to see. You have to sort of use an inspector if you wanted to view it. WP Super Cache bangs the information in the bottom of the HTML it's served up, and it uses advancedcache.php. And if you want to use some programming to stop WP Super Cache caching, you can just set a constant do not cache page and it won't. W3 Total Cache has all these complicated ways of caching, and it will provide that information in the comments at the end. And it has, there you go, performance page cache advanced, never cache the following pages. That's how you go and find out where to exclude your stuff. It uses advanced cache and object cache. And you can buy a pro version, which costs you $99 a year. Lightspeed Cache, I didn't get a chance to get anything to work with it, unfortunately. It doesn't use advanced cache because it does its own stuff, and nor does WP Fastest Cache, and you can buy a version of WP Fastest Cache for $49.99. Other paid solutions that you can have. A couple of months ago, we talked about headless CMSs, and Static is a form of caching, a rather extreme form of caching because it takes a complete copy of the site and it serves it up from there. But the Static people say they actually use WP Rocket as well. So this is something that costs you £24 a month, but you get the first 4 months free. And some people, Alistair's gone, will you say it's worth it to use WP Rocket? Yes. And other hosting companies provide their own caching solutions. So we've seen SiteGround Optimizer. There's WP Engine has caching. I've just noticed that Ionos has its own caching functionality, but I don't know what it does. And Bluehost and whoever else you host with probably have their own caching solutions, which you can tell me about. So the question we ask is, which caching solution is right for me? And the answer we give as architects is, it depends. And it all depends on what hosting you've got, what your functional requirements are for caching, what number of visitors you expect to get to bits of your content, how many come and visit your homepage, how many come and visit your contact form, and the size and complexity of your site. They got so much stuff that you really couldn't cache it, or is it so dynamic that you just don't know how you could cache it, so that next time someone comes in, they don't get out of date stuff and they need to have update stuff. And then you might have plugins and themes which affect the caching capabilities. And then there's also your personal preference. So what do you like about the plugin? What do you dislike about the plugin? How are you going to get on with using it?
Well, again, it's probably the complexity of setting up the plugin as well for what you get back from it.
Yeah.
Because the SiteGround one looks very easy to configure compared to a lot of the others. I think.
It is. What the SiteGround one is hard to configure to stop it from caching some stuff.
Okay.
And that was a concern with somebody at the Cambridge Meetup. Says, even if I don't want it to cache, I have to have the plugin in order to stop it, which is a bit strange. So we could spend some time discussing that, or I could just move on to my conclusion, which was, since I'm hosting with SiteGround, I have to use SiteGround Optimizer. But if I was to use WP Supercache, I would use the expert cache delivery method because I saw it was very quick. But I don't like it because it broke in my Windows system and took me a bit of effort. W3 Total Cache was extremely complicated, and I think it's bloated as well. And I could explain, if we had some time, why I say that. Lightspeed Cache I didn't get a chance to work with, and WP Fastest Cache doesn't do what it says on the tin. And you can go and click on these links on here or in the WP Pompey thing and find the slides. Off you go, and you can read some more stuff from there. And WP Beginner updated their best WordPress caching plugins just beginning of the year, and they had WP Rocket as top of the list, and WP Super Cache and W3 Total Cache were in positions 2 and 3. So there you go.
Is that based on the free version of WP Rocket, or is there a free version?
I don't think there's a free version.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So there you go. That's what I discovered. What do you want to tell me about? Why am I telling you porcupines? How do you disagree with me?
The other thing is, how do you measure this? You know, there are many caching tools, or reporting tools, but it's sometimes hard to really see what the results are when you put a site through a test. You know, you can do 3 or 4 different tests and get different results, as you found out in your survey. And you know, it's a bit of a time-consuming operation to test, retest, reload, retest, etc.
Yes, it is. But
we use GT Matrix, which is pretty good, but even that is It's time consuming.
I use for the front end stuff, the Core Web Vitals. I use Lighthouse and run it from my PC, so it runs the requests to particular things. Then I can look at a number of results based on the number of times I've run it. So if I can run it once for each of those different configurations, and I can run it again 5 minutes later and again 5 minutes later and see if it's coming up with the same answers. And unfortunately, my conclusion is from that is that Google Core Web Vitals, PageSpeed Insights, whatever, is extremely inconsistent with how it reports the results that you get, and it might adjust its answer because your machine took 0.05 of a second longer to give its first byte back to it. And it also depends what you happen to be doing on your machine elsewhere. I was running these tests without anything else running in the system, or hopefully anything else.
It doesn't seem to be consistent, does it, actually, Lighthouse at all? I've tried it several times and never got the same results.
I assume to have clear results, you can use some tool inside WordPress, like Query Monitor or something like this, to measure load speed. Exactly, I think.
Some of these tools that you run inside WordPress will only help you when the WordPress is being invoked, and doesn't tell you much about what's happening when your cached pages are being served. And in order to find out what's going on there, you have to look at your access logs, basically. You can see how much your site is running faster by the client responses rather than the server responses.
If you have htaccess, you can preload something, and then after PHP load something, and then check the results. It will be like a bit of work.
It is.
SiteGround's got a basic tester built into it, hasn't it? It's got a basic speed test, which
It just runs the Lighthouse stuff.
Yeah, it's doesn't give you the full results that you get normally with Lighthouse, so does that?
Yeah, it's just telling you.
Yeah, just the basics.
What it got.
So
On the subject of your variable results, there seem to be two obvious possibilities. Either there's some other caching going on. I know you're on a local machine, which does help simplify things a lot, but programmers love to put caches in. And so is it not possible that there's another cache somewhere around that's messing up your results? And of course, the other thing is, on a Windows machine, how can you be sure it wasn't off checking your email while you were trying to do the test?
Well, I turned my emails off.
Oh, very good.
And I didn't actually turn off any automatic updates, so there's a possibility it could be running those. But I did run the tests more than once, and the answer for why I got different results on the 8th of January was because I have a plugin called OIC BW Trace, and this plugin enables me to look at things that are happening in the server. So as Olga suggested, I could have a look at how long it takes for a plugin to actually get loaded up at start time. And I could then have a look at all the other different things. So I had, in different environments, I had the tracing turned on in different ways. So once I turned off that tracing, then I was able to get the consistent results between 3 of them. But then I had this problem where W3 total cache was taking a lot longer, and it was consistently a lot longer. And I thought, what the hell's going on here? So I hunted a bit further, and I discovered that on this particular page, right, quicker.com, right, if we scroll down to the bottom of this page, you can see something that is a little bit we did before last year, where I could try to unload plugins from being loaded up at startup time, and therefore improve the performance of the page by not loading that up. And you can see I'm not logged in, so it's not going to show it. I can't do it. Oh, no. But So this routine was running on each particular page load. Now, this routine is fine for when you've got plugins which are installed and activated, but can be deactivated by the routine itself. But it also was having a look to find if there are any other plugins that you had installed that you might want to activate. And it uses a WordPress function to go and say, what are the other plugins I've got installed? And WordPress goes to have a look at each plugin which is installed, and it looks into the root directory of that plugin and says, okay, then here's a PHP file. Is this a plugin? And it loads that information up using get plugin data, and then says yes or no, and therefore my routine then puts that into a drop-down list, so I can then choose to activate or not that particular plugin. W3 Total Cache provides 461 PHP files in its plugin root directory. So whenever that routine's run, like when you go and visit your plugins, it loads up each one of those, the WordPress loads up each one of those files to go and find out what plugins are there. And that was taking 0.1, 0.2 of a second on my PC, loading up those files. So that explains that one, and that's why I don't like W3. One reason why I don't like W3 Total Cache, because it's bloatware. But it doesn't mean to be, but it just happens to be by mistake.
So the message is be terribly careful about anything that might also be running at the same time.
Yep.
I can only see your desktop at the moment, Herb.
Good. Is there anything you shouldn't be able to see? I'll stop.
Nothing incriminating there.
All right then.
So, one of my clients, when they had their website developed, it was running on a Magento back end, and the company that was developing it wanted to try and set up some very fast caching system. I'm not sure what they used actually, they never did say, but basically when you went onto the homepage, as soon as you got onto the homepage, the caching system just started to try and cache as many pages as it could from the site, but it kept causing their firewall to fall over, basically, because it was just thinking it was under a DDoS attack. So you need to be careful if you're caching a lot of pages in the background with your caching system.
I think, was Alistair gone? Has he disappeared?
Yep, looks like it.
No. WP Rocket or something has got some logic in where it will preload it based on if you happen to hover over a link. It says, oh, if you're thinking of looking at that, I'll go and get it for you.
Yeah.
And does Firefox also do that? The browser itself says, well, if you're interested in looking at that, I'll go and start loading it up for you. All that pre-fetch stuff that you have to do.
Right.
There's all sorts of different things that can be done to try to PHP Insights says you should try to do. Tell it if you're going to go and load things up from somewhere, tell it in advance that it can go and resolve the DNS to go and find out which IP address it's going to use to go and make that request, so on and so forth.
So how does that get params work then, Olga?
Ask her again, Mike.
Yeah. How does that get params work? You put in the chat there.
Oh, sorry. So some plugins are working with get parameters, and you can choose which parameters you can clear and not count. For example, if you have UTM metrics or something, so you can like ignore them and think that the page is the same. But some other plugins don't cache the page with get parameters at all, and this is really bad for performance, because especially if your users are going from paid advertising or something, they will have a lot of these parameters. So if when you are choosing your caching plugin, you need to count on this one as well.
Okay, thank you.
Right. The other thing is whether or not you can cache REST requests, because that basically sort of caused all caching to fail. As soon as REST API gets used, it's well, we don't know what parameters he's passing through. I can't return the same result as I return to that person. Therefore, it doesn't cache anything. So there are other plugins that deal with that.
It's a good point, Hell. And what about Ajax? I assume it
Ajax
isn't cached.
aren't cached either, are they? Which is a good thing. So if
Because
Terry with your
WooCommerce.
and it's using an Ajax request, that should be okay. So the page is served up, and it's the browser that does the job of working out what's in your shopping cart.
And actually updating a form to add products to a cart, because sometimes you have products which carts can be outdated. For example, if you have one product and it was solved, so page will be getting from cache with this one product, and then WooCommerce is updating this form separately and getting fresh results. So it's quite convenient with WooCommerce to work with.
Yeah. That was the problem with my analogy of making a cup of tea.
I was getting to it too slow, really. Sorry about tea.
So here I only made one cup of tea, and some people like to have herbal tea, some people like to have decaf, all that sort of stuff. So it wasn't a very good example here of what was being cached. It was just one piece of content being cached. If you had a whole WooCommerce site, then you should be having each of the different cups of tea available for someone to choose from. Anyway, my cup's now empty, and it's 8:15. It's later than 8:15. So
25:08.
were there no other questions? I'm going to race on to the wrap-up stuff.
Herb, could I just take you back to the original list that you had of about 6 different caches?
If I can go the right way. That?
No, I think there's one before that, or no, might have been after. Sorry.
That one?
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's useful. Hang on, let me just let me screen grab that.
WP Pompey. That's, you find that slide in the current today's entry.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Herb.
Just on one point, Herb, you mentioned a few times Cloudflare.
Yeah.
I've had a problem with Cloudflare today, and that is that the latest version of Firefox, if Cloudflare decides to prove you're a human, it then decides that the latest version of Firefox 109.0 is out of date.
And what can you do about that?
You have to wait till Cloudflare get their act together and acknowledge that that version of Firefox is actually released.
Oh.
Yes, you're getting to you've updated, and then you go into a catch-22 loop. So it's just something to be aware of if you're using Cloudflare for your site, that someone might not be able to get to it because of that.
That's interesting. And there's nothing you can do apart from say don't use Firefox.
No, don't update. For your user, updates on the day it comes out. Then Firefox, then Cloudflare hasn't got their act together. Then you could end up with that. Leave it for a week, and then it will be fine.
I think that was just a shame, really, wasn't it? Do you think they'll have sorted it by tomorrow?
I don't know. I will. I've asked the user to try again tomorrow. So he emailed me and said, I can't get to your site. So
WordPress has something against Firefox, I think.
no, I've been using Firefox since version 1. Okay, and it's my preferred browser. But sometimes it doesn't play with Cloudflare.
I have a grudge against it.
So I use in one of those sites, when I have that problem, I use WaterFox.
WaterFox.
Yes.
Oh.
It's a fork.
Uh-huh. Never heard of it. Thank you very much.
There you go. You've learned something tonight.
I do learn things every day.
Okay. I've just tried my client who hosts on Cloudflare, and that site seems to be working okay. So I'm not sure which version I'm running actually. I've got the developer version. Is that what you're using?
No, this was a user of my site, and
Right.
they'd upgraded to Firefox 109.
Right. Okay.
Cloudflare decided, prove you're a human
Okay.
and not a bot. They try to do that, and then Cloudflare says, sorry, use an up-to-date browser.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, as far as I can see, my Firefox is up to date, so that seems to be working okay. Oh yeah, it's 110B.
So you're on the developer for the next
On the
version.
developer one, yeah.
Yeah. The released version is 109.
Right, okay.
If the bot had seen that message, it could say, oh, well, I won't use Firefox anymore. I'll pretend I'm something else.
Yes.
Right, I'm going to carry on.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you for our sponsors. That's the list of sponsors for 2022, and it seems to be the list for 2023 at the moment. 460 Meetup members. Thank you very much, Perry, for joining us. Did you know there was a Meetup in Exeter as well?
I did not. No, I will check that one out.
Well,
Try and get one down in Cornwall as well.
They haven't met for a number of years, but that's organised by a man called Simon Blackburn, who is John Blackburn's brother. Or was. There are other meetups around. Brighton was supposed to have restarted last year, but they haven't actually had meetups yet. And Bristol, I think, was trying to close down. Someone else wanted to get it going again, and I've never been known about Tunbridge Wells. There you go. We have a few people turn up to our meetups, but not as many as they've been joining over the years. This year, 2023, WordPress 6.1.1 was released last year, and then there was State of the Word last year, and we're going to have WordPress 6.2 development this year, Beta 1 coming out on the 7th of February, and finally WordPress 6.2 on the 28th of March. And those of you who want to go can go to WordCamp Asia in Bangkok, the first WordCamp Asia apparently. Later on in the year, WordPress will be 20, and Abba Thakur is trying to organise something to celebrate that. And then in June, we can go off to Athens for WordCamp Europe. And finally, there's a community summit in August. Those are the things I've listed so far. If you want to find out how WordPress 6.2 is getting on, you can go and click on the link there, make WordPress org core tag 6-2, and have a look at and join in if you're keen on developing WordPress yourself. Full-site editing themes. I've been quite interested in these things over the last couple of years. There was this target of having 500 themes in the repository by the end of 2022. Not sure how they adjusted their target. They ended up with 216 themes, well now, of which there are 573 style variations. So if you happen to go and choose a theme that has variations, you can quickly click on a button and your theme will change color, font, size, all sorts of stuff. Isn't that great? But people are still developing themes at the rate of 7 times faster normal themes than there are full site editing block-based themes.
Good.
Last year we did that, but except for in December I postponed the meeting because I didn't get the caching stuff done. So this year we've had Battle of the Caches, and next month I think we should have a New Year's resolution clinic. Did you make a New Year's resolution about what you're going to do with your WordPress websites, and how far have you got so far with it? How's that sound?
Good.
Yeah.
So everyone had to come along and tell us what they said they were going to do, and then to tell us how well they've done. And then from there on, I've got a blank sheet. So if anyone has some suggestions of what they want to have done, what they would like to talk about themselves, etc., etc., and do we want to physically meet up at some stage during the year as well? Then let's get that in there. Yes, you want to meet up, Steve?
Yeah, why not?
Where have you got to come from? You Gosport based?
No, I'm not. I'm at the other end of the county in Aldershot.
Oh, we're at top. All right. Well, can you get down to Pompey easy enough?
Well, I get down. I'm going to be down in Pompey on Saturday at the Linux users group.
All right. Well, with Paul.
Yes.
Ah. Well, there you go. Maybe we should have a combined one.
Oh, they're not interested in WordPress. Apart
No,
from
Paul did talk about it once, and I went to one of your meetups once upon a time as well.
Yeah.
To listen to Paul talking about it. Never mind. So that's that. No plans really, apart from next month we can do something. Now, did you know there are now 60,113 plugins in WordPress.org and 10,402 themes? And there's an awful lot to choose from. Yes, of course you knew that. And then thank you very much to our sponsors. Now, did I actually stop recording? Well, I meant to ages ago. But I'm going to now. More. Stop.